Ta-da! From November to December 1932, one of the most infamous wars played out. That, of course, being the Great Emu War. Now, this war is legendary, just based on how terribly it went. Not for the emus. The Australian outback does not seem like a great place to farm, in my opinion. Like, at all. I may just be naive to what the outback truly is like, but when I think of the outback, I think of dry, inhospitable desert. Not exactly ideal for farming. I mean, it would be hard enough to be a normal farmer who, has done it for generations, but that was not the case here. These were veterans of World War I. Not saying that veterans don't know how to farm, but that probably wasn't the first thing they were good at. Also, fun fact, it was the Great Depression, so the world in general was kind of in a rough spot. And for a little bit of extra chaos, we'll throw in a severe drought. So the outback, a well-known desert, also in a drought, farmed by people probably weren't really well known for being farmers. So with all that being said, before the Emu War even began, a quarter of these veterans had already left. I'm just going to call them farmers from this point on. So at this point, a quarter of the farmers had already left before the main part of the war even began. So that should tell you how bad things kind of were. Now, emus themselves range most of Australia. They are the second largest bird behind the ostrich. And they kind of live like ostriches. They run and they go for miles and miles and miles in search of food, and they do really well going long periods of time without having sustenance, water, food, all that. But because of the fact that it's so hard for them to come across food, when they do find it, they go ham. They tend to stay amongst themselves. Individuals. They don't usually get in groups. But when the conditions are right and they go in search of food together, they form mobs. That's just what a group of emus is called. And these mobs of emus go in search for food together. And in 1932, with a drought, huge mobs of emus started to converge together to go look for food. So these big mobs of emus searching for food come across these farmers' fields. Now, again, this is Australia. They have all sorts of problems when it comes to pests, like rabbits as an example. So when these big 6-foot tall emus come across a farmer's crop, they're able to destroy the fencing around it. And when an emu eats, it's not exactly gentle. They would break through the fence, and a big mob of them, I just love saying mob, a big mob of them would go in and they would eat as much as they possibly could, but they're also trampling stuff. So even the stuff that they didn't actually eat, they would just destroy it regardless. And after the emus had their way with the farmers' crops, they would leave the fences ripped open and allowed the smaller animals like rabbits to come in and finish off the rest. So basically, by the time all was said and done, what little crops the farmers could actually get going were then just destroyed by the emus and whatever came after. Now, the farmers themselves, being veterans, tended to have weapons. They tended to be able to defend themselves. But when it came to the sheer amount of emus they were facing, they could only do so much. I mean, this is the Great Depression. They're in a tough spot. They can't really waste ammo, so they started to beg the government to come in and intervene. So the Australian Minister of Defence, George Pearce, decided to show them how competent the government could be in solving this problem. Because we all know that when the government helps, does a good job. He sent 3 soldiers from the Royal Australian Artillery to the Campion district where, is it Campion? To the Campion district where the problem was the worst. Major Gwynedd Purvis Wyn Aubrey Meredith. Gwyn Purvis Wyn Aubrey Meredith. He sent Major Meredith, Sergeant S. McMurray, and Gunner J. O'Halloran with 2 Lewis machine guns. No, machine guns like that. Pop, 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 pop. like legit, like what they used in World War I, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. And to show how good of a job the government was going to do, they sent a cinematographer to capture all the events. And yeah, there's video. Honestly, it's kind of hilarious. You know, gunning down birds, as hilarious as that could be. But because of how ridiculous the whole situation ended up and how they made it seem, it kind of made up for how terrible it was they were using machine guns on birds.
With the enemy watching events through their periscopes, raised up over the heads of corn. Now they're retiring, off at 40 miles an hour. Well, instead of the birds ruining the farmers, it seems the tables are turned.
Now, these three had approximately 20,000 emus that they were sent out to cull. So, they set out, and on the first day, a group of emus is walking towards them. And they opened fire. And as soon as they started opening fire, they thought that the emus would all just stay together and they'd just be able to, you know, shoot into the group, just right into the group. What ended up happening was the birds just scattered into smaller groups, making it very difficult to pick off individuals because like they had to go and aim and shoot at only individuals rather than just a big mass of birds. Now remember, emus can also run 40 miles an hour. So as soon as the birds started running, they really had only a few seconds to get off shots before they were out of range. Okay, first attempt didn't go so well. They only killed a few birds. And then they noticed that they felt like they shot a few more, but when they got shot, they just kept on running. Anyone who has hunted birds before knows that in that mass of feathers is a tiny little body. I mean, if you've seen an owl without feathers, you realize that the actual mass of the bird is the hit target is very, very small. Even on a large bird like an emu, those feathers actually distract from like where the body, the hit target actually is. They noticed that when the birds started realizing that they were being hunted, they would have a very large one that would keep track, like they would be a lookout. And as soon as the firing started happening, that bird would run off and then all the other birds would scatter before they even had a chance to really do anything to them. In one event, they waited by a water source and thousands of emus showed up. At least that was the claim. They waited and waited until they were merely a couple of yards away and they opened fire. Unfortunately, after a few rounds, the gun jammed, and out of those thousands of birds, they only managed to kill a couple. In the first 3 days of the war, they only managed to kill 30 emus. 30 out of thousands that were in their range. They couldn't do anything about it. Eventually, they mounted the gun to a truck and started driving around chasing down the emus. But the thing is that in the rough terrain, the truck was slower than the emus. Not only was it slower, but it was bobbing around so much whenever they would actually open fire on the birds, they couldn't even get a proper aim down. So like they're just chasing them around, shooting randomly, and they can't even hit the birds. And to add insult to injury, they ended up crashing the truck. And by November 8th, they realized that their operation was a complete and total failure. And they were ridiculed in the media for their efforts. Meredith eventually decided to pull out because in those few days, it was like just over a week of having a machine gun, over 10,000 rounds and thousands of birds near them, they only managed to kill 300. When the farmers realized that they were leaving, they were not having it and they demanded them to come back. So on November 12th, they returned. Now, not much is really said about what happens after this point because I'm sure at this point they were so embarrassed by how poorly they did. They didn't really talk about what they did or how they did it. But because Meredith's reputation was riding on how many birds he killed, he claimed that they confirmed 986 between November 12th and December 10th. And the claim also was that 2,500 died later of their injuries that they were not able to actually verify. So in over a month's time, on the highest end, they supposedly killed just over 2,500 emus out of the thousands that were in the area. Now, again, these numbers, no one really believes that's how many they killed, but we're just going to have to take his word for it. Now, by December 10th, it was realized that the amount of ammo that was being used to kill these birds versus the amount of birds that were actually killed made this operation not worth it anymore. After this failed operation and people realizing that when the government promises you something, it's probably not going to happen, they left it to the people. And what do I mean by that? They offered a bounty. And anyone who knows that when you offer a bounty for an animal, that animal is screwed. People are going to find a way to get the job done. And over the course of the next 6 months, 57,000 bounties were claimed. So with everything said and done, the emus absolutely got the best of the Australian government. Now, fortunately, unlike animals like the thylacine, it didn't go much farther than that. Once everything was good, they weren't like, once the bounties were filled, sure, more birds were dying, but like they weren't wiped out of existence. So that is the story of the Great Emu War. I hope you all liked the video. Let me know what you think down below. Like, subscribe, and comment. Welcome to 2024. I hope you like Mr. Emu. I worked very hard on him. And let me know down below if there's any other animal stories you want me to go over. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.